the past decade, Charleston has experienced highs and lows when it comes to the weather. I sit down one-on-one with CHSWX meteorologist Jared Smith for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and download my free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores.
Jared Smith, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Hey, thank you, Quintin. Good to be here.
You're welcome, and Happy New Year's to you.
Happy New Year to you as well.
I appreciate it greatly. Obviously, you are the founder of Charleston WX on Twitter, and you provide a lot of accurate weather information for us here in the Low Country. Meteorologically, what is it like to be Charleston in 2019?
Flooded. I think that is the if that isn't the story of 2019, really weather-wise, I don't know what it is. Yeah, we had another brush with a hurricane, our various summer storms, and flirtations with the possibility of ice, and but we're also dealing with the warmest February on record for the second consecutive year. And we dealt with 89 coastal flooding events this year. Fortunately, we're not going to hit 90 because the tide's going to stay in check today.
Yes.
But really, I mean, it's what's going on with the water levels, what's going on with the sea level rise, what's going on with, like, how did we go from 54 to 89 events? So I mean, that's a pretty major jump. We'll see if it's an outlier or not next year, but we've all become so numb to it at this point.
Sure.
That's the thing that's crazy to me, is that it's like, oh yeah, it's flooding again. It used to be, and I can tell this, and I can kind of get public sentiment just by looking through metrics and things like that. It used to be, it's like, oh man, it's a coastal flood event, coastal flood advisory going out. It used to be that those would get, pretty decent engagement. Just speaking from an engagement perspective, is like people see that as like, oh yeah, this is important stuff to share. It's like, but when you're doing that every day, you just become desensitized to it. And then it's only the really big stuff, the the moderate flooding levels and greater, where you really start to see people freak out about it. Yeah. I will say that, for Charleston, one of the great things that has happened is that we are finally taking control of what we can control, and that is with the check valves. Coming in on several streets on Morrison Drive. It used to be, you probably know that would flood. At a moment's notice, somebody spills a glass of water and that thing's closed, right? Well, not anymore. The check valves have done a really nice job of keeping that open. Several other places, I know the market is going to be getting check valves, which is sorely needed there. They're raising the low battery right now to try and alleviate what's to come. And so I really think that as we're going to continue to have our summer storms, we're going to have our hot days. We had the earliest 100-degree temperatures on record in May this year, this past year on Memorial Day, and that was just that was stifling and awful. I mean, that was awful. And again, February seems like second spring, and we get worried about that because of crop damage. For farmers and everything like that, stuff starts to grow. You can't just say no, stay. You can't, you can't just tell it no. It's just going to start going, and then when inevitably there's one last freeze in March because winter's not over, then you're dealing with a lot of money loss. You think about oftentimes, if you look at the billion-dollar disaster list, you're going to see, if you have one of those freeze events, you're going to see one of those freeze events get caught up in a billion-dollar disaster. Nobody was killed. Nobody was hurt. There was no major news coverage of it at all. But still, that's a major impact to the economy. So we've got, we've got work to do from a resiliency perspective, and the good news is that we're doing it.
You talked earlier about the sea level rises and obviously the waters. How is it right now?
So this morning it was it was high tide driving in this morning. Certainly was predicted around 5.4 feet. I'll have to take a look at what it ended up being. It certainly looked a little bit higher than that, and it's just been kind of the theme of the year. And we need to go back and figure out what's going on. It's not just a Charleston problem. Miami, the Tidewater. We were just talking to Jim Cantori a couple weeks ago on Carolina Weather Group, and he was talking about how they had people in Miami, just constant, it's just sunny day flooding, and so there's work between the meteorologists, oceanographers, and scientists of all disciplines to figure out, okay, like, have we reached a point where this is accelerating to be the new normal, or was this just a fluke?
Is this the new normal?
I think so. I think that we've got to, the fact that we're investing, so much money in new drainage, so much money in check valves, so much money in raising the low battery, things like that. I think that's a recognition that, yes, that we are trying to, barricade against the new normal. You had 89 of these events in a year. That's a lot of sunny day flooding, and we're very fortunate that heavy rain did not necessarily impact a lot of those, especially during the summer. Now, of course, a few days ago, about a week ago, we certainly dealt with that. We certainly dealt with that combination. We've been very fortunate that we haven't dealt with that more. So it's just about it's just about getting just making sure that we continue to identify the problem areas, find ways to work around them, and make sure that everybody is, that we have solutions for as many people as possible.
And what's holding us back from not getting more of those events like we had just recently?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. Again, it's just dumb luck sometimes. We had numerous cases throughout the year where it's like, oh man. You have models dousing us at the same time as high tide, and it doesn't work. And it just doesn't work out that way. Our models are good, but they're not perfect. And they raise the alarm of a possibility, but it doesn't pan out. And we've had a lot of close calls. We had close calls in Dorian. We actually got very lucky with Dorian in that there was a prediction of a 9-foot storm surge, but it missed out by 6 hours. And that's the difference between a high and low tide cycle here.
Wow.
So instead of 9.8 feet in the harbor, which would have been a top 10 tide, top 5 tide, we ended up with 7.2, 7.3, and it really wasn't that bad. We got very lucky in Dorian in that respect. So, it is as unscientific and crazy as this sounds, we wish we had an explanation for everything, but sometimes it's just dumb luck.
Dumb luck. How do you describe the theme of the decade? Because we had a lot, Hurricane Matthew, the 1,000-year flood. We had the winter storms, the ice storms.
Yes.
What's your theme in your mind?
It's. I don't know that there's any necessarily one theme. I think the theme is that. You know what? I'll take that back. Yeah, there is a theme, and that is, I think that the weather awareness and weather preparedness of the community has increased over the last decade. I think people are really starting to see how weather impacts their day-to-day. We have people who are just so much more engaged. I can tell you from, the last 10 years running the Charleston weather account, people are taking action, people are doing more, and that's great, and we want to see more of that. We want to see more people, understanding, why are they cutting in the middle of a program? Why are they, So I think that, the events that we've had, the 2014 ice storm with the Ravalanche.
Right.
That one really put that on the radar. It's like, those are things that we didn't think about. They just plainly didn't think about. It was like, ice storm in Charleston like that? No way. And it's like, that would, that's something that would not happen often. And then we did it again in 2018, and we've had a few other icing events, but 2014 stands out most in my mind because the reports from it wasn't just at the coast. There's a lot of coastal bias, of course, and because that's what we think about. We thought about that. You saw the Ravalanche and everything, and how those pieces of ice were falling down on the bridge. A miracle nobody was killed.
Thank God.
No doubt. But the thing that'll stick out to me from that ice storm was the experience of the people in Berkeley and Dorchester counties along inland of 17A.
Right.
When they were talking about the tree damage that they sustained and how it smelled a lot like Hugo. That's what stuck out in my mind from that one. And it's like, that was a level of, and at that point we hadn't had our hurricane scares yet. It had been a long time since we'd had a credible hurricane scare. We were still kind of like, our last evacuation was Floyd. That's where we were at that point. And so that really, pardon the pun, that sent a few chills down my spine, hearing about how this ice, brought down, all these branches and created this pine smell. And for people to be out of power for weeks, that's something that we associate with hurricanes, not with ice storms. So that one certainly, stuck out in my mind as something that was certainly a big surprise. I would say Matthew was the one that kind of shook us from our hurricane complacency a little bit. Sure. Very close shave. Got very lucky with that one. in many aspects, it was the first evacuation under the new zones, and so it was the first evacuation under the rules that were no voluntary, no mandatory. It's just an evacuation. So a lot of confusion there, a lot of lessons learned. Jason Hurdick became a superstar as the interpreter, and he's fantastic. I think that he's done a lot for the deaf and hard of hearing community, and it was great to see him get the stage and for being what he was doing. I thought that was really a really cool story that came out of that. But then we do it again. Right. And we're just doing it over and over. We didn't do it for Irma, which was actually worse than Matthew in many aspects from a flooding perspective. And from a tornado perspective, Irma was worse. But then we had Florence, which was a non-story in Charleston. Right. But you go north of you go into the PD region, and it was, and they're still dealing with it today. And then 2018, right? So you have Michael coming up, doing another dousing. You have, in addition to what Florence had already done, and then this year we had Dorian. And Dorian was a very scary storm. And that one had the potential to stall out. It was going to stall out somewhere. Mm. It could very easily have stalled out over the southeast U.S. Mm. Unfortunately, it stalled out over the Bahamas. Yeah. And did things that were just unimaginable. Mm. And so, and it rightfully scared some people. But I also think that our forecasting has gotten to a point where, and this is a remarkable thing that I saw earlier this year, and I forget who said it, and I really regret that because I want to credit them. But it was something that I saw is like, it's a remarkable win in forecasting that you could have a major hurricane 100 miles off of Miami and not even have a hurricane warning up there because you have great confidence that it's not going to strike Miami, and it didn't.
Mm. Why did it stall over Bahamas and not Charleston when it comes to Hurricane Dorian?
It's just where the high pressure ridge set up. If it was a little bit weaker, it would have come a little more north. Mm. Steering collapsed, and it just happened to be where the steering collapses. Mm. And it just is a nasty thing. But we've been seeing a pattern with that. Sure. We saw that in Harvey. Sure. So in Texas. Right. Florence. Right. Absolutely. Right. Florence was a weird one. That was the one that everyone was freaking out that it was going to follow the Euro solution and come southwest down the coast. That's pretty hard from a physics perspective. and for it to maintain its strength. Yeah. That was a little far-fetched. Yeah. But yeah, it stayed there and it stalled out. Mm-hmm. And so we have all of these storms now that that for some reason, and this is something that tropical researchers are looking at very closely, they come up to a certain latitude, steering collapses, and they're sitting there for days just raining on people. We've had several events like this, and so there's a lot to look into there. It's an alarming trend. I don't want to see it continue.
And where was the latitude when Hurricane Dorian arrived?
Oh God, when Dorian got here, so Dorian at that point was starting to make its jog kind of north and northwest, a little bit of wobbles, and then turn into the northeast, and it hugged the coast. It did its thing. It was very Matthew-like in that aspect. Fortunately, did not make landfall. The only landfall it made in the U.S. was very brief along Cape Hatteras. Right. It was very, very brief. And weakening, but we were lashed by that for quite a while. It was a slow mover, and we got a good bit of rain, we got a good bit of wind, but the wind being probably the wind was up there, I think past Matthew in some aspects, a little further inland. Wow. But maybe at the coast, maybe not as bad as Matthew because the eye wall did not come ashore. It was close. But really, but then at that point, it just did its thing. It recurves, right? And and once again, the major damage in Charleston was not necessarily. People were out of power. I was one of them. Wow. We had many people out of power. Some of them for a week or so. We had a lot of street lights out, and and much praise to the storm crews that were coming in from all over the East Coast. I saw a lot of them. I was actually traveling the week before and saw just convoys and convoys of tree removal from Pennsylvania, power companies from New York, all coming down to bolster that, and that helped to recover really well. The psychological damage of the hurricanes, I think, is something that doesn't get a lot of play. Because now we're in evacuation fatigue. We do it every year. In some form or fashion, we do it every year. And we do it, people leave, and come away reasonably unscathed. Thank goodness they come back.
Sure.
And then we do it again, and then fewer people leave, and then fewer people leave, and then it's like, well, what will it take?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the communication challenge now that, the social scientists, meteorologists, and working together, something that I definitely follow very closely because it's, because this is important, because again, dumb luck.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't had a direct hit since Hugo.
Wow.
We're still there. And we might be overdue. And so it's good that we've had these storms to at least briefly break us to that complacency, but I'm worried that it's starting to set back in, and I really hope that that's not the case, because we absolutely are at risk. We're lucky, and our geography may have a lot to do with it. That storm the storms recurving the way they do. If you're recurving off of North Carolina, it's not the same because they're sticking out. We're like, our bend is just perfect.
Perfect. How many hurricanes were able to recurve over the past decade in your mind?
Oh my God! I mean, I have to pull out the map, but far more than affect us. That's for sure. And Savannah hasn't taken a hit in even longer. We haven't taken what would be described as a direct hit. We got a good brushing with Matthew, but again, McClellanville got Matthew's landfall,
right?
As he was kind of pulling through. Kind of the belief is that little friction from the land helped guide the low in, and we thought that was a possibility with Dorian, and not happening that way. I think that we see a lot of these things turn, sometimes just in time, but that does not stop the that does not necessarily stop the psychological concerns, because you still have your Hugo survivors, and you still have people who are just generally scared of these things, and I don't blame them. That's a sign of respect. It's a healthy sign of respect. And what we've got to do, as weather communicators, scientists, social scientists, meteorologists, is continue to work on ways to break through and show people that it is despite the fact that we've been lucky, it's still important for us to be prepared. And I think that we've done a really nice job as a community of helping to lift each other up and and spread that weather awareness message. And that's something that we're going to continue to do in the next decade.
And quickly, when it comes to Hurricane Irma, what else that we don't know now that we should have known back then?
So Irma was there was a lot of good lessons in Irma. One, the biggest one is that the track cone is not necessarily representative of what you're going to feel. Irma was in the Gulf of Mexico when we had that tornado outbreak. Right. There were weak tornadoes, but it was a tornado outbreak. I mean, it just is, they did damage. The Weather Service surveyed 4 tornadoes. Right. Were they weak? Yes. Could they have been stronger? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. We had storm surge that was, pretty potent, and it came around high tide, and we had, very heavy rain bands coming along. It looked a lot like the 2015 flood in many aspects from at least a radar perspective. Right. Obviously, the meteorology was different,
sure.
Of how that turned out, but we had, significant flooding. Irma did what Matthew couldn't, and that was dislodge the Folly boat. Let's keep that in mind. In fact, we're still feeling the effects of Irma. The old red number 8, the buoy just came ashore at New Smyrna Beach, Florida. That's right. It was pushed out. It was on Hilton Head, and then just kept floating. And so they're going to return it back to Charleston. Wow. But that one was dislodged during Irma, and so we're still hearing about some of these things. The Folly boat just got put in at the barrel. Right. But we're still very much recovering from Irma, more than we might be even recovering from Matthew in some cases. And that's not, and all of that to say is that, Irma aside, there was a tropical system that had a name. The 2015 flood did not. Yes, Joaquin was out there, but Joaquin was never a direct threat to the United States. What happened with Joaquin in the 2015 flood was that aloft, there was a very strong low pressure system that dug in and created like an atmospheric river, connected Joaquin to the eastern U.S. And that helped produce that massive amount of rainfall. And with Joaquin's slow movement and the slow movement of that upper level feature and the way that it just kept that fire hose tilted and pointing at us. And so you didn't need a name for that. You didn't, the September storm, arguably much more rain than Dorian. Arguably much more rain, certainly, you can have a thunderstorm and have much more rain than Florence here in Charleston. You don't need a name for these things. So it's important. It's important for people to not get hung up on whether something is named or not. That goes in tropical season and not.
Right.
In 2015, everyone was like, all the survivors of Hurricane Joaquin. And it's like in South Carolina, no. that was not Hurricane Joaquin. Was it a connection? Yes, absolutely. The moisture channel was there, and it was originated from Joaquin. The satellite pictures are amazing. And we say that from a scientific point of view, not from an impacts point of view, obviously, but those kinds of events, you don't need a hurricane to have very disruptive weather. And so once again, it ties back to the fact that, Irma, there was heightened awareness around that. Certainly because, it was rain with a name. But many times, things with names get kind of blown out of proportion, and the things that don't get, the attention that they deserve. Not necessarily, and I don't think it's necessarily the media's doing. It's not the National Weather Service is doing. They're doing what they can. It's just that names stick in the public's mind. No matter, the media here does just. We are blessed to have the meteorologists that we do in Charleston. We are so fortunate. We are so lucky, and up and down from the evenings to the weekends, they're all fantastic. And so so it's not the broadcast. It's not an NWS. Those guys are the men and women of the National Weather Service. Do phenomenal work when they're shut down, when they're not, and you have to give them a lot of credit for how they engage and keep engaged in the community. They've done a really good job with public outreach and everything like that. So that's not the issue. It's just the public needs to understand that, yes, these warnings, the potential is here, for something serious. Because again, we got tropical rains last week that coincided with the high tide driven by astronomy and meteorological influences. No name.
Wow.
Just a lot of rain.
A lot of rain.
Ton of rain.
And
we got lucky that it wasn't more, because there were some places on James Island that recorded over 10 inches.
Wow.
So again, we were lucky it wasn't worse than it was, and it was already pretty bad.
Wow. To be continued.
To be continued in 2020, my friend.
Exactly right. Well, Jared Smith, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups on this New Year's Eve.
Thank you, sir. And Happy New Year to you, Quintin.
Likewise.
And 10 more years of what you do.
Oh, thank you greatly.
Yeah.
I'm believing God for that.
Very good.
Yes, sir.